how do I get the value out of this? Somebody's going to ask me in my company, how do we pay for this? What's the value we're going to get if we do this automation? And that's the role that I play at UiPath, called value engineering. I'm going to walk through some slides here to give you the understanding of how we begin to identify, calculate, and communicate the value of these automations. For most of our customers, one of these 5 areas, or some combination of these 5 drivers, is what compels them to look at the automation carefully. Obviously, as we do these automations, we're going to drive hours out of the business. Param's opening slide talked about providing robots so that people don't have to be robots. That allows people to do more time. They free up that routine activity so they can now do the meaningful work that you pay them to do. But ultimately, somebody asks us for some kind of financial justification. Where's the favorable financial impact of moving some of this routine work to the automations? And I'm going to talk about that in some depth. But there are 3 other areas where automation plays a great value, and oftentimes these are bigger drivers for company. Risk mitigation and avoidance is big. Compliance, whether it's SOX compliance or audit compliance, a number of things automations can really help zero in on and make sure that your processes maintain their compliance over time. And ultimately, once the robots are developed and tested, put into production, validated, you're going to have error-free, repeatable reliability. And so some combination of these 5 drivers is where companies go. But I'm going to spend my time focusing on this favorable financial impact. When we talk about favorable financial impact, it usually comes down to one or more of these 4 specific financial areas. Does your proposal increase sales, reduce expenses, optimize assets, or mitigate risk? We got 4 great examples of customers that have done exactly these things. And I'm going to walk through this in more detail and unpack some of these areas in specifics for you. But PwC created new revenue streams. Orange, the big telecom company in Europe, used it to drive costs out of 2 large particular cost organizations. Often not viewed as a common automation application is how automation can help really optimize the supply chain and that whole working capital aspect of the balance sheet. And then, of course, banks and other financial institutions are always trying to find ways to mitigate and reduce financial risk from financial crimes. And so while these are 4 marquee examples, we've got many, many others with each of these quadrants, each of these particular financial drivers, where we can show value for automation. I used to be an auditor for Deloitte. I was an audit manager for years, so I'm very familiar with financial statements. And this is where my team comes into play, is take what Param has showed, where's automation help the organization, and then interpret that into financial documents. Now, when you think about financial justification, often it comes down to the ultimate driver, which is how do we improve shareholder value? And on the far left-hand side, that's our goal. And you can see I'm trying to drive these arrows, these red arrows, in the direction that they point to make sure that I drive improved shareholder value. And as I bring it back to the 2 primary financial documents, the income statement and the balance sheet, you can see there are those arrows as they point there on how we can influence the shareholder value by driving these particular levers up or down. When it comes to increasing sales, there's a lot that automation can do to help drive sales in an organization. Probably the most common example we talk about is giving hours back to the sales force. Field sales teams oftentimes spend a lot of time during the week administratively, updating call logs, updating the opportunities within whether it's Salesforce or other CRM activities. And while that's necessary activity, it also takes time. And that time takes them away from selling. When we can return that time back to them, they can spend more time in the field with customers. And over the course of the year, the expectation is more calls means more orders means more revenue. We have a number of customers that are using automations to help in the CPQ or configure price quote space. Configuring particularly some of these complex deals that some of your companies are involved in, putting those configurations, those quotes together is a lot of data gathering. It's important to make sure the quote is right so you don't overprice or underprice. It's important to make sure that it's done in a timely way. These quotes usually have specific time deadlines that have to be submitted to a purchasing organization. And so the ability to produce these quotes accurately and in a timely fashion can drive more business. We think about cost of goods sold, and while oftentimes you don't think about how automation can help, there's a lot that we can do with particularly managing scheduled downtime, because unscheduled downtime is expensive. Managing scheduled downtime is obviously the goal if we're going to have to repair or do maintenance on any kind of the factory equipment. Now, most companies have asset management tools they use to do that, but oftentimes it interacts between multiple systems within the organization. And as Param talked about, we have connectors that allow us to integrate between various enterprise apps. So whether you already have APIs there or you don't, we can use our automations to connect those things for you to make sure that those bridges are done smoothly. One of the big areas we focus on certainly is SG&A, all those variable costs. Anytime we can reduce the administrative burden, boy, we focus a lot on finance and accounting. There's so much we can do there, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But beyond finance and accounting, there are things automations can do to help with the onboarding and offboarding in HR, improve performance in the customer call center, and even reduce the time spent in IT, particularly with regression testing and a lot of the other development activities. And as I mentioned, optimizing assets, the ability to compress day sales outstanding, the ability to compress the time it takes to move product from raw materials to finished goods. These are very important metrics that organizations track, and we have customers that are attesting to how they're using automations to actually favorably influence these very fundamental financial metrics. The key is that we talk about what's the value of automation. Our team looks at how do we communicate that back using things that the executives understand, which brings us back to the income statement and balance sheet, ultimately to drive an improvement in shareholder value. I often look at my customers and compare them to their peers. Now, obviously, I don't have a customer called ABC Widgets, but this is from an actual customer slide that I presented. And we looked at capital efficiency, working capital, and headcount efficiency for this customer across both their domestic and their Far East peers. And we found that they compared rather unfavorably on all three of those metrics. And we had a great conversation about how automation can help favorably influence each of those particular areas that's important to them. And we would do the same for other customers as well, because it's important, again, to talk about what's the value of automation. What do we get? What does the company receive if you invest with us and do automations in your organization? Well, we want to show that that has value to your organization, that what you were today, pre-automation, you're much better off post-automation as we begin to really address and zero in on these key and core financial metrics. I talk to a lot of customers. I travel all over the country, and I've just been keeping notes of what I hear customers say, and this is just a quick little list that I hear very commonly. Now, this may not be a list of your common challenges, but I'm always surprised at how many customers often respond with, "Have you been reading our email?" No, I've not been reading email, but this is what customers talk to us about as common challenges. Data is fragmented across multiple systems. Data integrity is lacking. We have too many manual processes. We're dependent on tribal knowledge. Our call center agents have to navigate between too many systems during calls, making the calls take longer, and it's disappointing for our customers. We've gone through acquisitions or we've gone through mergers, and now we're trying to integrate this data in these systems, and it's been much more challenging than we anticipated. We're too dependent on people being conscientious. One key departure could definitely have an adverse impact. And boy, probably my favorite one that I hear most common is we are way too dependent on Excel for key decision making. And I put these here because, and this is something that Param mentioned, a recent article that I read said the average mid to large company has 150 enterprise apps. That's a lot of complexity to manage. And while it would be wonderful if we could consolidate that, maybe just have one instance of SAP or one instance of some of these other systems, the reality is that's not likely to happen. And consolidating instances oftentimes is not necessarily a high payback activity. And so what can we do to reduce this complexity? What can we do to reduce this friction that exists in the organization caused by all of these enterprise apps? Well, UiPath provides great automations to make a great management layer so that the users, it appears to them as one system. It looks more homogeneous. So even though underneath there's still complexity, we're allowing the automations to manage and work with that complexity so the users don't have to. And that's one of the key things we want to talk about as we talk about how automation can bring value to your organization, is not only the automations themselves, but how they can interconnect with some of your main and primary financial and enterprise systems. Now, McKinsey did a study recently, showed that in their estimate, $3.6 trillion of work is automatable. Now, that was based on their assessment. There are 1.5 billion knowledge workers globally, and these 1.5 billion workers spend on average 10 billion hours of repetitive automatable work annually. The key here is there's an awful lot of work that's being done. You're paying well-educated, likely high-dollar people to do work that is quite repetitive, things that the robots can do, so those people can now do the meaningful work that you brought them in the organization to do. Well, what are these tasks that are automatable? We have access to many studies, and these are a couple that we draw on frequently. On the left-hand side, we see this blue graph from EY. Now, what EY did is looked at the business functions across an organization. It says, what is automatable? And you can see there, this was for a particular industry, 81% of the finance tasks, 78% of the admin tasks, 61% of the sales tasks are candidates for automation. And on the right-hand side, McKinsey did a study that said, of these functional areas, they picked finance for this example. Here are the real candidates for automation. Not everything, of course, is a candidate for automation, but some things are real rich for automation potential. And so they stack rank those to give us an idea of where we can do that. Now, when you think about that, that's great that that's potential, but what's likely to be realized over a couple of years? So Bain did a study to follow on top of that and said companies or organizations that are deliberate about automation in a 2 to 3 year period can expect to see 20 to 30% of that data from EY to be realized. So if you look at this example, customer service, that slide said 55% of the tasks were candidates for automation in EY study. And the Bain study said 20 to 30% of those can be realized in 2 years with a deliberate automation initiative. So 11 to 17% of the total tasks are candidates for automation. Now that's interesting, but when you look across the organization, we end up with a slide that looks like this. Now this is a model that my team produces when customers say, we're interested in automation. A, we're not quite sure what to automate first, and B, we're not quite sure what the value of such automation might be for us. And so here's a model that we produce that takes what I just showed you and says across several different business functions, here for this particular company was their potential automation value that we looked at. And you can see here that we've got sales and IT and customer service kind of leading the way. Working capital, of course, was a big one at the front end. If we could save that customer 2 days, collect their cash just 2 days sooner, it was worth over $17 million. And we've got automations and customers that attest to how they have used automations to actually collect their cash and report it and post it sooner. Now, this is great, and this is a great place to start, but the next most common question customers ask is, okay, this is interesting, but where in sales, where in IT are we going to get this value? This is an interesting slide, certainly. 47 million is a compelling number to move forward, but where, how do we unpack that value? So we look at an org chart like this. Now, these bullet points are actual automations that either UiPath or our customers or our partners have produced to drive value in these very specific business functions. And you look across from left to right. In the finance area, the record to report, the end of month reporting. Having been working both as an auditor, but also have done a lot of financial work in automations, customers use a variety of systems. Some of the data they collect in SAP and they feed over to Oracle Financials, but they also may use tools like Blackline or Anaplan to do their end of month and end of quarter reporting. Okay, these are fundamental and great systems, but they've got to interact. Moving that data back and forth is a tedious activity. Automation can make that much more streamlined and make it faster for them. Same while in customer service, you think about a call center. The start of day, end of day activity takes a couple minutes each day. Why not let a robot do that? The start of call. Every time a call center receives a call from an agent receives a call, typically they have to enter 6, 7, 8 applications so they get the full view of the customer. Let a robot do that. A robot can do that in seconds. And across the page, you see all the various activities. And this is just a subset of the many things we've done. And what Param talked about earlier is the many systems that companies have. We have connectors for many of these. You can download them from our marketplace. So you can get a jump start on your automations to begin to accelerate that time to value. And for those who are not necessarily numbers people, but are word people, let's talk about what the value is of automation. Honestly, it's additional capacity and capability. I've talked about the value of an hour for sales reps, and you can read the other bullet points there. There's so many things that the hour can do. And once that hour is freed up, what can those people do in that organization? I'm not talking about decreasing headcount, although some customers use that as their driver. But most of our customers are just saying, my people are overworked. And I'd like to be able to let them do more of the meaningful work that we hired them to do and offload this tedious work that is unfortunately part of their job. Well, let's do that. Let's let automation do that. And for those on the audit and compliance side of the house who care about those issues, many, many value points about what automation can bring to that side of the organization. This is one of my favorite examples we talked about. PwC, in their first year of automating, drove 5 million hours out of their organization. And that's a whopping big number, certainly, in their first year. But if you think about it, they did this across a population of 50,000 people. And if you do the math, it's 2 hours a month. And so you think about all the kind of work that professional accountants do, and I believe this was largely in their tax organization. You think about all the meaningful work they do, but they also do an awful lot of work with Excel and other tools where there's a lot of data entry, a lot of data manipulation. 2 hours a month is not a lot of time to save to get that kind of value. And they were able to use robots to do that. One of the drivers that made PwC so successful is that their leader, their CEO said, think about everything you can do on your desktop that we could automate, and let's make a plan to get that done. So rather than saying, gee, I wonder where we should automate, they flipped it on its head and said, we know there are things to automate, but we don't really know what everybody does on a daily basis. Let's have them give us good ideas and build a pipeline for automation so we can accelerate this. So when you're talking about time to value, obviously one of the key issues is how do I get value faster? And Param talked about these issues here, right? When I'm thinking about what do I do to drive value out of automation, I have to first discover what I should automate. Param talked about the tools. We certainly can provide our models that say, based from an outside perspective, it looks like these areas are target rich for you to move forward. So we can help you discover what processes to automate, what processes to identify. Once you've identified them, we have tools to help you build that. Whether you engage our consultants or you do the work internally, you can use tools from UiPath to build those automations faster. Once you build them, pilot them and test them, begin to manage them. You can put them on the cloud, you can put them on premise, whichever makes more sense for you. And finally, to really accelerate that growth, engaging, not just with the robots as much, but also looking at how you do your executive leadership, your governance, organizational change management, all to drive adoption across the organization. So discover, build, manage, run, engage. All of this, we have tools to help compress that time to value so you can see value faster in your organization. And as Param concluded with his slides, we always want to make sure everybody understands the full scope of our portfolio. We're very proud of how rich it is, how comprehensive it is. We have a great ecosystem, both internally and with partners, to help move things forward for you. And so eager to talk with you further at some point in time.